opposing fans love to hate.
With just over a minute remaining.
Redick takes a step back, fires a three, and swings!
And I was just like, I don't want to play anymore. Like, this is not for me.
Now, as Redick goes out to a deserved applause.
This year's College Player of the Year was arrested early this morning on DWI charges.
JJ has it, fires in time for the win. The Clippers win!
A very, very proud moment for us today to introduce JJ Redick as our new head coach.
The hiring of JJ Redick as head coach is unlike anything we've ever seen for a couple of reasons. One is his coaching and experience.
I have never coached in the NBA before.
Most NBA head coaches earn their stripes by being an assistant in the league or a head coach in the NCAA and sometimes overseas. But JJ Redick boasts a coaching resume with just 1 year of coaching his son's 4th grade basketball team.
And this is me.
Is your son's team, they're running established already?
Yeah.
He's now the 4th Lakers coach in the last 6 years, and is coming into one of the most complicated situations where he's expected to make a championship run with the 39-year-old LeBron as the star player in the loaded Western Conference on a team that's going to look completely different in 2 years. And now even Bronny James is in the picture, and that's another responsibility. So how did he get this job?
His podcast.
The Lakers offered him this job because GM Rob Pelinka became sold on Redick's ability to connect with players and his high basketball IQ, both of which have been documented on JJ's podcast and his various media endeavors. Today we see multiple NBA players with podcasts, probably more than we need to be honest, but JJ Redick was actually the first NBA player to have his own back in 2016 when he was on the Clippers. Thanks to Redick, in a news cycle that heavily depends on debates, rumors, and narratives, we started to see more player perspectives and players speaking for themselves. As more players followed in his footsteps, we got raw and unfiltered conversations from the NBA's best players, and from him specifically, we also got to see the X's and O's of the game being broken down to fans. Redick brought a freshness to NBA media, and we know this because everybody seemed to enjoy seeing him cook Stephen A. Smith on First Take.
There's a lot to unpack there. I mean this in the nicest way possible to both of you, but listening to each of you right now, it's very obvious that you've played zero high-level basketball, and you do not understand the requirements of doing that. And I do mean that in a nice way.
I think it's safe to say that before taking this coaching job, Redick was the face of NBA media. I mean, the man had a podcast with LeBron James, who never does any media with people outside of his camp. And many speculate that that specific podcast with LeBron had a lot to do with the hiring.
Try to set this rip screen. I would act like I would come off and just push off and come off Joe.
I'm glad you said push off too. It's very key to the viewers.
It is definitely.
It is very key.
The other thing that happens.
What about Clipper down?
Oh, we're gonna get to that soon. The other thing was, let's say that.
Whether that's true or not, one thing that's clear is that his coaching opportunities were tied to his dominance in the media space. But is that really enough to land someone the toughest coaching job in the NBA? And how did a career 12-point per game scorer become the face of the NBA media and now the head coach of the most storied franchise in the NBA? To answer that, we need to go back to the question, who is JJ Redick? To some, he was one of the cockiest college basketball players ever, and to many others, he's a college legend. At one time, many saw him as a bust, but to many others, he was one of the greatest role players that the NBA has ever seen. These are the many faces of JJ Redick.
There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
Because of that game-winning shot right there, JJ Redick had his eyes set on one goal in his childhood, and that was to play for Duke University.
My whole sporting life since I was 7 years old and watched Christian Laettner hit the shot to beat Kentucky, I was like, I want to go to Duke. I want to go to Duke.
He excelled as a high school player in Roanoke, Virginia, where he finished his high school career as a 5-star recruit, ranked as high as 13th in the nation on some recruitment boards. He was also selected for the McDonald's All-American game, where he was named MVP, so JJ was a standout recruit, and it had earned him an offer from his dream school, Duke. What JJ didn't know, however, was that by committing to Duke, he was stepping into the infamous role of the Duke villain. A Duke star basketball player who becomes one of the most hated players in college basketball, with the hate mainly coming from rival schools because the player is a star who talks trash, acts emotionally, or because he displays poor sportsmanship. Many also believe that it has a lot to do with the fact that the player is white, which makes them a target because of the assumptions that come about as a result of them going to Duke. Whatever the case is, JJ was next in line, and he found early success with the Blue Devils, and that was because of his strongest skill as a player, which was his shooting. He's easily the best shooter that the program has ever seen, and he put that on display right away. He was the second highest scorer on the team as a freshman, leading the team in free throw percentage, in three-pointers made, and in three-pointers attempted. And he also set various free throw records for Duke and the ACC. His best performance that season came in the ACC championship game against NC State, where he scored a game-high 30 points in a comeback win in which he dropped 23 points in the last 10 minutes of the game, helping Duke to erase a 15-point deficit in the second half. His freshman season was one of the best ones in Duke history, and he went on to have another good season as a sophomore, where he led his team in scoring while showing a jump from his freshman season. But as he was doing all this, he was also on the receiving end of the animosity that every Duke villain gets from fans. And with JJ Redick, it was a bit more, or at the very least, just different from the other Duke villains that came before him.
You know, JJ got it worse. I think JJ got it the worst of anybody who's ever played at Duke.
Like any quote-unquote villain in sports, JJ had it coming to him every time he was on the road. From heckling to trolling to weird posters in the stands, he saw it all, and he also heard it all, mainly from Maryland fans. Redick, however, seemed to lean into that character of the villain, especially later on, doing things like waving the crowds home during blowout wins, talking trash to the Baltimore Ravens owner in one game, and letting opposing benches hear it while he was torching them. So some of the hate he was getting was because JJ was also a little bit annoying. But for the most part, everything he experienced was because he was a killer in the court. In one game, he led Duke past Texas in a blowout win, dropping 41 points, and get this, he got the Texas team to retire the uniforms that they wore in that game.
Dude, you retired our black uniforms, dog. You know about that?
Yeah, I do.
They told us we got these new black Nike Elite. We see them, we're like, oh my God, we're going crazy. What shoes we're gonna wear with them? We were so hyped. And they blitzed us, man. I did not see that uniform ever again. They got rid of it.
Did you guys run into each other?
JJ Redick became the most hated college athlete in the country, and even though he leaned into that character, he wasn't going the distance that some of the fans were. For example, in his time at Duke, his phone number got leaked about 10 to 15 times at rival college parties, which led to him getting calls all throughout the night every time it happened.
All night long, like 30, 40 calls. You know, as soon as like the number shows up at a Maryland party or at a Maryland bar, like my shit's blowing up over and over and over again.
Some fans also went overboard, making comments about harassing his little sister and other indecent comments about his family, and all that had the 19-year-old Redick questioning whether basketball was the right path to take.
I'm amazed at some of the things that come out of college students' mouths directed towards me.
How can anyone just be that hateful? It just didn't make sense to me.
My sophomore year, I called my sister's campus. It was during the Christmas break, and I was like, I'm done. Like, I want to quit. And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, I
don't want to play anymore. Like, this is not for me. It's not fun.
I was like, I want to be a normal student. I want to go to class. I want to be a frat kid.
Like I really struggled those first 2 years. It was really hard for me. I spent like 3 years at Duke, like seeing a therapist. I mean,
really?
Yeah. And it was like
he didn't just think about quitting, but in a way he actually did. After a bad shooting slump in March Madness and a loss in the Final Four, Coach K let Redick know that it was a big reason why Duke had fallen short of the national championship. That was the cherry on top that sent JJ into a deep depression that had him away from the team and his family after the season, as he spent his days in a dark room just drinking beer and watching movies.
During one of those meetings, he said, we didn't win a national championship because you weren't worthy to be a champion. It was true, but it was like so soul cutting, right?
Kind of hit like rock bottom. It was like basically hiding from people, like hiding from the coaching staff, hiding from my parents. I had like an incomplete that semester. I was really just like at this dude's apartment for like 2 weeks.
And I would wake up at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I'd start chugging beers. I'd have a burrito, party through the night, wake up at 2 p.m. I did that for 2 straight weeks. No one knew where I was. I told my parents I was in summer school. I told Duke I was back home finishing my incomplete.
That finally came to an end about 3 weeks later, after 2 assistant coaches found JJ in a friend's apartment. They found him about 30 pounds heavier and took him to Coach K's office, where they talked him through the situation and drew up a training plan for his offseason and his remaining time at Duke in what JJ remembers to be a turning point in his career. And after that offseason, it was clear that JJ Redick was a different player, and he went on to have his best season, leading the ACC in scoring, becoming an ACC champion and the National Player of the Year. But even with all the growth that he showed in that year, some still weren't sure if he was an NBA caliber player, including Redick, who was preparing himself for a basketball career overseas.
But at the beginning of my junior year, coming off my sophomore year, I took Italian. so that if I had to go play overseas, I knew a language.
But in his senior year, he put all the doubts about his NBA readiness to rest when he had an even better season, averaging 26.8 points per game, leading Duke to another ACC title and a Sweet 16 appearance. He won his second ACC MVP trophy, and he was named National Player of the Year for the second time. And with the multiple performances that solidified him as the best sharpshooter in the draft, JJ Redick had turned himself into a lottery pick. His draft stock, however, was put into question after the end of his senior season, just a few weeks before the draft, because of this.
JJ Redick made headlines on the basketball court. Now he's making them off the court as well. This year's College Player of the Year was arrested early this morning on DWI charges.
He's expected to be drafted by the pros in just a couple of weeks, but before he ever heads to the NBA, he's likely to be headed to court.
One night just weeks before the draft, Redick made an illegal U-turn on a highway in North Carolina in what looked like the avoidance of a police checkpoint. Redick was then pursued and stopped by an officer who described him to have very glassy eyes with a very strong smell of alcohol coming from his breath. He was arrested and was released on a $1,000 bond the following day, but it made headlines and it looked like a potential problem for his draft stock. And to add to that, he also suffered a back injury in a pre-draft workout, which also caused some concerns about Redick's long-term health. But in the end, all that didn't seem to affect Redick's stock because he still ended up in the lottery. He was drafted 11th by the Orlando Magic, but there were still some questions about whether his game would translate at the next level as an undersized shooting guard who was not very athletic and who was not an elite playmaker. JJ was fully aware of this, which is why he entered the league with no aspirations of being a superstar on a team, but a role player instead. I think I'll be a role player like 80% of the players in the league are. I don't expect to be a star, I'll just shoot and be a team player. And that's exactly what he did, just not right away. JJ's first few years in the league didn't pan out how many expected him to. He struggled to get minutes under coach Stan Van Gundy and was in and out of the rotation in his first 2 seasons. So his numbers were poor and Redick's NBA future was already in question.
To start my NBA career, it was just a matter of survival, where you legitimately think there's a chance you could be out of the league.
Because of his early struggles, JJ had that title of a bust looming over him. He did, however, have some success as a member of the 2009 team that made it to the finals, where he was in the rotation a bit more consistently. With time, he picked it up and became one of the better 6th men in the league, and by his 5th season, he was averaging double digits. But to some, he still hadn't lived up to expectations as a lottery pick. He was, however, recognized as one of the best shooters in the league, and that would go a long way. He later got traded to the Bucks for half a season, and he didn't know it, but by the end of that year, he had just about wrapped up the first half of his career, and the remaining half was about to completely transform the way we remember him. Redick's next stop after Milwaukee was LA, where he signed a 4-year, $27 million deal with the Clippers during their Lob City era. For a team that was so dependent on the pick and roll and scoring from their bigs, Redick made the Clippers' offense more lethal with his shooting and overall just by spacing the floor. He went on to average career highs in points for 2 straight seasons with the Clippers and a career high in 3-point percentage in his 3rd season with them. He averaged over 15 points in his 4 years with the Clippers, which is something that he had never done for a season in his first 7 years. Around that time, the NBA was also evolving in terms of shooting, and so his value had increased so much that the Clippers couldn't afford him in free agency if they were to keep some of the other key pieces on that team. And because of that, he ended up on another contender in the Sixers, who gave him a massive payday with a 1-year deal worth $23 million. He resigned with them for another year, making him a key piece on 2 of the best contenders in the past decade that just couldn't secure a championship. He spent the last 3 seasons in the league playing the role of a vet and a locker room leader for teams with young stars, but if you compare his first 7 seasons and his last 8 seasons, you see that he completely turned around his career, destroying the bust narrative and actually becoming one of the best role players in his generation. After his playing days, he obviously dominated the media world, starting his own media company, covering the NBA Finals and co-hosting the Mind the Game podcast with LeBron, and now he's the Lakers coach. It's hard to tell how his first year as a coach is going to go, but let me know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Until next time, peace.